So everybody, thank you all for coming here and knowing what Shin Megami Tensei is. That's already, you're doing more of the Lord's work than you know.
Just staring at me.
So we've got the SMT5 panel talking about the postmortem. Will not be super duper super spoilery, so that does help. Person for coming in, you are welcome to a prize for not being one of my friends who was already here. But friends, since you're here, I do have stuff for you. So if you want, you can come and grab this. Oh no, here we go. It was under the giant cookie. There we go. In SMT5 fashion, I brought a bunch of Persona 5 merch. So I will let you pick. Do you want a pen or do you want a acrylic keychain?
Pen.
Then you can choose between Ryuji or Morgana.
Ryuji.
Perfect. So, to start off, in case anyone didn't know, SMT5 released in the very, very long distant future of November 2021. Enjoy these two plushes that will probably never go on sale, and definitely never the Algami plush. These were made by Atlas West to just torment plush collectors everywhere online. And apparently I have blackmail on one of them, so they were nice enough to send me one. So, a little bit of info for it. SMT5, since launch, has been really crazy in terms of two things. It's actually one of the highest rated SMT and Persona games out there, which is really, really crazy. I will say, I think it's interesting, especially because, Marcus, you're sure. Nocturne on PS2, I think on Metacritic, is like at a 92, which is extra funny when you look at how low in the 70s Nocturne HD is. Which I think is probably like, I don't think Nocturne, like OG Nocturne should be like in the 70s, but I don't think it needs to be a 92. 90 seems really, really high for OG Nocturne.
I think the remaster has got low ratings because it didn't buy it.
No, not when the C Nocturne thing was, it was an overpriced thing of a not too super awesome, like, yeah, it was a weird thing of like, it's a classic, but it's a really weird way to sell a classic. Yep. With still things taken out of it, which most people don't like for it. But going back to 5, the other thing that's crazy, it is now one of the highest selling games in the whole series of, in just less than one quarter, it's already sold over 800,000 copies worldwide. Important thing to know about that, making it not only one of the fastest but best-selling games of the series. The craziest thing about it, it's only on one platform, but a big number behind that has got to be because in the rest of the world, obviously Atlas published it in America and they published it in Japan. In Europe, Australia, all those other regions and stuff like that, it is just totally a Nintendo game. Nintendo published it themselves over there, so they had a ton of marketing push behind that. You know what you would know? You were there.
I saw it on Facebook advertised as a sponsored ad, so that's
and he's one of the lucky ones because you've got the exclusive Nintendo Shop sticker set.
Yes.
Which is notable for being a licensed piece of Nintendo merchandise and literally just has a giant vagina demon on it. Which was really like that. They were like, all right, we got to pick these demons carefully. The penis one's too much, but if we get the giant vagina demon, now that's aces.
Saw it in a couple of YouTube ads, too.
Yeah, basically. So, like, the game was marketed, I would say, very, very well, which is interesting given how quiet they were pretty much up until E3. E3 this year was like the big kind of coming out party for it. Give the release date, give the gameplay, kind of let everyone really know about it. Like, if you knew about it, you were either really bored and watched a Nintendo Direct way back in either 2017 or 2020. So it was one of those things of like, it wasn't a household name really until E3. Also, yeah, I was just going to say, I'm so glad Dynamite is playing, but I know they're not going to do the whole song, which makes me sad. So first off, this is really funny. I did a panel back in September back in Kansas where I live, where I had the cast appear. And even then, as someone who covers this weekly for my podcast, I was like, I don't fucking know any of these people's names. Yeah, so I do a weekly podcast called Shin Megami Tensei Network. So it's a weekly thing of talking. I appreciate it. If you've seen this face a lot, then yes, you probably do. But yeah, thank you. So yeah, it's on Twitter. It's a Facebook community, Discord community, YouTube channel, all that other fun stuff. So funnily enough, when I did this like literally less than 6 months ago, I maybe knew Algami's name and maybe Koshimizu. It was very, very light because a lot of it is like not super English friendly names, let alone like RPGs, especially when they use very traditional Japanese names. Like, it's not something you're going to pick up from the ad. You're not going to see like, oh, it's Atsuda. Would it be like Atsudas? Or like, I don't really know. So here we have protagonist Kun. So we can do a fun round table of everybody here. I named mine very originally Spencer Kun. What did you name your protagonist?
Oh my god, I can't remember.
I'll let you think of it. John, what was yours?
I named him Gnarly Amamiya.
That fit? Oh, yes, first name, last name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pat.
No last name?
Well, I'm not gonna dox myself.
Oh, that's true.
I'm gonna put my real last name.
Pat, I'm just going to be like Pat, or, you should have done Persona Man. So the whole game they're just talking to is Persona Man.
I did that in Devil Survivor. It was the most hilarious thing.
Oh wait, what's the name of that meme guy, the dancing guy with the USA bandana?
Oh, Ricardo.
That's what I named him.
You name. I love the fact that this little Twinkie over here would be named Ricardo in someone's game. That's awesome. Okay, Kat, you have not started 5 yet, right?
Oh no, I'm like.
No, you did. You were streaming it.
Second or third dungeon.
Okay, now we'll do a couples game, mini game of this little Rita segment. Kat, what is Marcus's protagonist name in his file?
It's just my name.
Well, that's not really a game then if you tell her the answer. It was supposed to test her.
I don't even know what my protagonist
Okay,
is.
then Marcus, what's her name?
Like Big Chungus or something.
Probably. You know what? I think
I did something stupid like that in Nocturne.
Yeah, you did.
I named
yeah, it's
my
true.
protagonist-
She messaged
Ah!
she messaged me at like 3 a.m. to like do a stream like, should I name my demi fiend and I was like, I guess. What about you, man?
I always name it after whatever anime I'm watching, so I already forgot the character's name.
Aaron Yeager?
I'm watching Kishi, so like I named it after like whatever the main character's name.
Okay.
But I already forgot it, so that'd be cool.
I am assuming nope, none for you yet. What would you name this boy? Like, if you had to name this guy, what would you name him? You look at this face, and you're gonna like, what's he give you? Twinkie Twinkle would be a good one. What about you?
So if I have the game,
Mm-hmm.
I always like try to find like whatever the official, name
That's
is.
the best part. There is none for him. So, like, the closest we got is I interviewed the voice actor for him, and I love doing this for like ones where it really doesn't matter, of asking English VOs to name a canon character they voice, and the first thing that came to the person's mind is their name was Casey, so it'd be like, oh, it'd be Casey. So like, which weirdly, like, even though like Casey's not a like very Japanese name at all, I could get a Casey vibe from like that haircut. That's like a dorky Casey look. What about you?
First name was my Discord handle. Last name was something you would probably name your Pokemon rival. It was something dumb.
Was it you? Please, hold on. Do you guys name your Pokemon rivals like insulting names? I thought we all just do the normal thing and name them after our least favorite parent, so then you can just beat them up constantly. So if you were playing, what would you name your protagonist?
Usually, when I play Persona, I name my character after myself. So, Dominic, I usually just keep it simple, just name it after
We should change it. Don't do Dominic, just so we could really get the Fast and Furious vibes for this whole cast. Just call him Dom. First name Dom, last name Dom. No, Dom family.
Fast and Furious before, and I realized that
Dom.
First name families.
For coming in here so late, you actually get a prize. Would you like an acrylic or a button? That's why you come in. I'd say there's prizes, and then people come for the prizes. You want a pen or a button?
A button.
You get to choose between Ryuji or Mona.
Mona. Let's go.
All right.
Go play guy.
All right, so our next character is Tao, everyone's most favorite person to have no feelings on until the end of the game. So Tao is really interesting for me, at least, I went from, and I mean, I'd still say she's probably the most boring person in the whole cast. But what's so funny about Tao was I went from being the most harsh on them to actually doing a complete 180. And without spoiling anything for it, it was very, very interesting for me of the more I think about the character, I like what they did in terms of the foreshadowing without being very direct. And one of the things that people have definitely been talking a lot about this game with 5 storytelling is that it definitely leaves a lot up to your imagination, which I know not a lot of people like in terms of storytelling. Oh, what? Yeah, I mean, but I think with this one, though, one of the things is, like, because the world is so detailed, when you don't get everything, I feel like you have that, like, you either really like filling in the blanks for yourself, or you're like, I kind of would have liked a little bit more.
That's another aspect of why I like Nocturne, because it's not just, like, throttling you with character detail.
I would say this, Nocturne has a problem for me of, like, after getting all of the endings, it just makes me be like, boy, I hate all of these endings. Like, have I ever told you what my favorite Nocturne ending is?
Is it neutral?
No. Well, is it whatever? Because I think it's just normal demon ending, where just Lucifer's just mad you didn't do anything and you don't fight the final boss. That's my favorite ending.
You played a centrist.
Exactly. Because like that was my favorite one. That was my last ending I did in Nocturne, and I want because I was going for the platinum with HD, which I don't recommend anybody do, and I was like, I had to beat the game on hard. I went through it on hard. It was like, okay, it's fine. I didn't really like Nocturne on hard. It was okay, but it was just one of those things. If I'd already gotten like all of my demon, I filled out the whole compendium. I'd done the whole thing, so it was very much. I'm just going through the numbers, and I can't tell you how happy it made me when God looked at me at the end and said, "I don't even want to fight you." The end, and it rolled credits, and I was like, "Fucking score, dude, sweet."
What I'm trying to say is that, like, in terms of the alignment system, which is one of the major features of it, I really like it because none of the endings are necessarily bad. They're all just like up to what you.
No, and yeah, that's some of the best part. Although that's another one of like Nocturne has very clear, and definitely 4 I would actually say is way more on the nose about who's good, who's like. You look at like when it shows you Walter.
They're very well characterized.
It's what I would say if it wasn't for the personalities of people like Walter and Jonathan and Isabeau, they would just be like caricatures. That's like they're so predictably like I'm good or I'm bad. Whereas like 3 kind of does the same thing. Like you don't really know it, but like when you see Jean Top Girl do her thing, it's like, okay, I see it. There's no character progression reason for you to do this, but I see it. Whereas everybody in this game's cast, their outcome, if it didn't make sense at the time, at least was foretold and made more sense for it at the place. And same thing with Tao. Although Tao's place is very much more cut and dry because of her place in the overall story. Next up, we have Atsuda. So Atsuda is kind of one of those weird ones of like, he's a character I would have liked to have more of, but he's kind of one of the characters. There's like, I'd say 3 major characters in the cast that unfortunately get sidelined. And they don't get sidelined because like they just forget about them. It's more of you have to have a character that you're going to really focus on for an alignment, and it's always kind of hard to give them more screen time, I would say. So his character is going to go to someone we're going to see in a little bit later. So here's Atsuda's sister. Atsuda's sister is such a weird, like, catch-22 of she's another one who really doesn't get a lot in the game, unfortunately, and even if you haven't seen it, the thing that's being said is the little bit that's there is one of my favorite quest lines in the whole game. She has a great quest line with one of my favorite characters, and it's a really interesting surprise because it totally comes out of left field, but it makes sense thematically. The only thing that sucks about it is because it was a side quest and not a main quest, none of it's voice acted and there's no real cinematics. So it loses that little bit of an oomph of like when you have a really cool story and it's just all text. I was like, okay, like you put effort into like writing that story and it was an interesting premise, but you like were like, let's save a couple $100 and not have anyone record anything.
I remember before the game came out, I saw like a lot of fan art of her and a lot of people simping for her, and then they're like,
I'll understand this.
I was just thinking like,
if you simp for Miyazu, I would understand that before Tao, which makes it funny because one of the things about Tao in the game is she's the school idol. Look at this. That's like saying a loaf of white bread is the best like dinner choice. It's like, I mean, what has she got that everyone else in this cast is hotter than her. There's no one who's like uglier than her.
There's a lot of like, fan art of him in that form.
That's true. So yeah, the thing with Tao I always just found so funny for that is like, I think every other character looks visually more interesting, let alone in the beginning has definitely got more going for them. Although one of my favorite characters is our boy Ichiro Dazai. So I'm curious, just like base visual design. Now you can't tell with the image that I pilled, but one thing important to know about him, he wears his pants like this. Normal outfit, rolls one pant up. I don't know why, but I need to ask, though, how do we feel about his design? Because I see some people will be mean sometimes. They're like, oh, dude, he looks like so dorky.
Isn't that the point?
But like, I get awkward, but I don't get like school nerd vibes. Yeah.
It's a good subversion because you would think on his appearance he's a chaos protag.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting.
I just like problems looking because he looks like a 40-year-old guy.
So that one of the funniest things about Daza, yeah. So like because he's got the blemishes on his face, yeah, they're not freckles, they're blemishes specifically, which is like one of my favorite things. I remember when the art came out, there were some people online who removed the blemishes because you probably can't tell with the way it's on there, but you can at least definitely see he's got his detailed cheekbones. People were like, because the cheekbones and the blemishes, they were like, oh, he looks older, and he looks kind of like. He looks a little bit weirder for it, but I think actually he's got one of those weird designs that probably doesn't look as good in 2D as it does in the game. Whereas in the game, what's really interesting about Ichiro's kind of like gawkier look. And actually, because bringing up the age thing, the IMDb photo for his voice actor at the time when they announced it was from the voice actor literally at like age 9. So it was so funny of like so the voice actor is Stuart Allen. He's a super awesome guy. But like all of his stock photos for his acting things were from like when he was like back on like Nickelodeon and like different shows like that. So like he's an actual grown like man now, but it's just so funny of all of his stock photos were like, we have a 7-year-old voicing this man who looks like he's 38 with jaundice.
The other issue I have is the same thing I had with Shinyona in 5, the Get Smoked hat, which made sense for a kid, but he's just got sucker on his hat. As you get like later into the game, like I mean it's total a nitpick thing. I'm like, I can't take this guy seriously. He's like this ultra serious scenario, like Tokyo's FUCK, and he's just got sucker on his hat.
I will say, I think one of the funniest things about him is I feel like you could have made a game with him as the protagonist and almost had just as interesting of like a story out of it, just because he's got such an interesting perspective of the case of he's really the I'm out of fish out of water situation here. So him in the story, he also becomes a demon summoner along with Atsuda and the protagonist. Atsuda had already been summoning demons, helping out before in the background of the story, whereas you and the protagonist, Ichiro and the protagonist are brought into the world of Dada at the same time. And what's so funny about that is they do such a great job of showing his perspective, because you're a silent protagonist. He's not, like, you're not having conversations about how weird this is, so he kind of gets to be your surrogate of voicing how weird this whole thing is for him, while also being interested in having a more down-to-earth perspective. Like, he's got so many great scenes that kind of humanize it way more than everyone else, because everyone else is just like, I guess this makes sense. I guess this is the world we live in. We're summoning stuff. So getting a little bit more into the demonic side of everything. So we've first off got Algami. So Algami is probably going to be like a really interesting one. Of like, he's one of my favorite aspects of the whole game. But what's so crazy about it is his use is a lot more than I would have thought it would have been. But it always left me like wanting more. So for the few of you that have like actually like played it for it, what were your kind of like thoughts on like Algami? Because like for me, I thought he did a good job of filling the void, since we are a silent protagonist, of actually giving us a way to kind of talk about like what this world is like, and because he's lived in it, he's a lot more easy to like adapt with. Like, oh, I was here. This was this. This is what you need to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was. Yeah, I think it was. I could nitpick about silent protagonists, but at this point I played so many JRPGs, it's moot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in the way he doesn't disagree with the protagonist, if you make a decision, he's like, fine, that's the way you see it through. I'm gonna go,
That's the thing. The game pushes that button sometimes, but it never does it enough. I wish, which is funny because he's not really a human. He's not a demon. He's not a human. He's a proto-fiend. And what's so funny about it is like he'll have these inquisitive moments where Algami will just be like, what do you think of this issue? Which is the game basically making you think, here's your alignment choice, even though it's not really affecting anything of the ending. So what's so interesting about that is I like that he obviously doesn't judge any of your answers, but I would have also loved it if he reacted to everything or at least had an opinion on it. Because there are some times where, like, he'll tell you, hey, don't do this, or I wouldn't have done this, or this seems like the illogical thing to do, without seeming like just like a computer or an AI kind of thing. So Damon does a really good job of kind of humanizing him in a way that makes sense. But the other thing with it that sucks, that's kind of a spoiler, but not really, only in the sense of, so he is only a part of one of the 4 endings, which seems so crazy. Because, like, the game will just be like, this is altering the world for X group of people. And he has nothing to say about it, which is just such a bummer. Because it's just one of those things of, like, hey, this is affecting both of us. So it would have been nice to have it for that, but it's also one of those things of, then you get, okay, are we now checking in with everybody? But it's like, I basically think of Algami as an extension of who we are playing as. So next up then with who we're playing as is the Nahabino. So not really a lot to say for this. Oh, I would actually like to do this, especially now that, John, that you're back. Really quick, does anyone not like Nahabino's design? You can just lift your hand up if you're like, I'm not a fan.
John, you put your hand down.
You're on the wrong side of history.
Really are.
It's like...
I was on the wrong side of history when I said something negative about Persona 5.
That won't change. Do you think in 5 years we're going to look at this fucking stud muffin and go like, that's a stupid design?
I'll just say the internet ruined it for me, how everyone was saying how he looked like a femboy.
I want you to know, I will still get comments sometimes in our Facebook group. People being like, yo, I know that's a dude, but...
Yo, they down bad.
Hack where he's dummy thick. Come on.
That's not a hack. That's New Game Plus. You got to beat the game 69 times to make it happen. Each time you start New Game Plus, his cheeks get a little thicker. That'd be...
I'm curious, there's some Untitled Chapter too. You go see those too.
Oh, sorry. Say it again.
There's an obscure Atlas Games thing. That sounds like.
That's So that would be after that with his. I think in the theater thing for it. So. Yeah, I would be amazed if this aged poorly. I think, like, the Persona comparison can be one for sure of, like, hey, people are going to be on the wrong side. At the very least, this is such a unique design for it. Also, one of the funny things I thought of, ironically, when I saw a very inappropriate, like, Rule 34, is I've never thought of this. It's safe to assume this was, like a onesie or, like, an armor suit. But I saw a really interesting design that was like, no, they're naked. This is just their naked body. They have no appendage, which would make sense because a proto-fiend is not really a human, so there's not like a male or female gender for it. And I just love the idea that all they're wearing is a cape, their long hair, and they're just naked with a laser arm, which would just be like the most hilarious thing ever. Because it's like, yeah, what is he, unzipping in there? It's like, no, dude, he's probably naked with like a six-pack in there. So next up, we've got Koshimizu, otherwise known as Boy, I Sure Was Dumb 6 months ago, and I thought that this was Algami's human form. So even though they look devilishly similar, there is thankfully a good reason behind that I will not spoil, but it is a fun little surprise. So Koshimizu is basically, if you are ever mad that Atsuda gets no screen time, it's because Koshimizu steals it all, and he does a really good job of it. So Koshimizu is really interesting he is the most I assume you're the bad guy role ever, and it never becomes that. Like, Prime Minister, check. In the midst of a crisis, check. Secret organization he works with, check. I was like, oh yeah, he's clearly a bad guy. Says he's the good guy in the beginning. Clearly he's the bad guy. And even in like the sense of like who he's aligned with, it's one of those funny things of like, no, his motives are super justified. It's really interesting. Like, the worst thing about this character, like, if I really had to be like Twitter.com, like, if I had to cancel Prime Minister Koshimizu, the worst thing I would say about him is I guess he's a nationalist. Like, he'd be one of those guys that's like, I love Japan and I hate every other country. Like, that's pretty much about it. But, like, even then, like, it's so interesting of, like, when you're in the world of SMT5, everybody has nothing but great things to say about him. It's like, oh, we love Prime Minister. He's handsome. He's young. He definitely fucks. I mean, look at that guy. That guy fucks.
I mean, to be fair, God in the game loves Japan only, too.
That is true. Also, one of my favorite things about this game, because it's definitely not going to be in the cast, I love No, I wouldn't say this is a spoiler. Saying someone never appears. I love that God is literally never in this game. It's one of my favorite things. They talk about God a lot. They never show God. There's never a flashback with God. God is very important to the story, but there's no reason to make God an IKEA light bulb again. So I was so glad that or any amalgamation of that. I thought it was so great to be God has a very specific purpose in this role, but I think making God a character, or God forbid a super boss. The fact that this game ended with you not fighting God, I was like, score. Thank God. Thank God for not having God in this game was my weird takeaway for this. Speaking of another female who is definitely more interesting and attractive right away than Tao. So next we have Nua. Nua, if you're not really familiar with Chinese mythology, has a really interesting history in terms of how she's related to creation, making humans out of clay. It's got all these really interesting bits of detail and background that literally never show up in the game. But that's a lot of mythology with SMT. But it's just so funny because as a really big mythology geek and stuff for it, I was so ready for all of her attacks to be it'll be weird, because she has a super, if you get to it, where have you guys seen the super where she will summon the little clay monsters?
Yeah.
It's a really, really cool move, and it's one of those things for it where it's awesome, what else do we got? But then she just kind of becomes a character, which is fine. But it's always one of those things of this game, and SMT is a concept in general. I always wish there's so many different mythologies that are being not only brought up but referenced and shown. You always kind of wish that there could be more, but it always has to be so surface level because who's going to know Chinese mythology in the year 2021? The game's not going to have an index describing this to you, so it's one of those cool things of if you know, you get a cool little kind of bump for it, but you always wish there was more. It would be you know how there are people out there, and there's nothing wrong with this, who are I know the only thing they know about Norse mythology is from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's a ton of...
About God of War.
That's almost that's a little bit more of a niche thing because it is a mature thing. There aren't people who were Hercules, I'm thinking of God of War 3 Hercules. Hercules for most people will still be the Disney Hercules. Yeah. So Disney's Hercules will be for a game... It is interesting how it uses it of the way it is there. It always makes you kind of want more for it. Whereas it is nice that it's always ambiguous because then when we do have demon designs, it is nice that no one's being yo, where's SMT whatever Thor or whatever something like that. A character if they redesigned Loki. No one's mad if they redesigned Loki for Persona 5 compared to SMT 5. It's just one of those things of there's tons of variants of characters. There are tons of ways to adapt and bring mythology there. So it's nice that it always is there, but it is one of those things of, I really, really wish that was there. Speaking of things, I could just talk about a whole bunch more. I don't know why I put all the handsome guys upside down. So we've got Yakumo, otherwise known as definitely not Raido Kuzunoha, the 99,000
budget Raido. He's the Raido at home.
Is this a hot take?
Raido.
I would say, if we're comparing Raido specifically from Nocturne, Yakumo gets more screen time and more love, probably. You actually get backstory, whereas Raido's backstory, and even in that sense Dante is, because really he's just filling in Dante. So even that, it's well, he's just there. Yeah, I traveled through a portal and I might not get back. Oh, you're talking about for Devil Summoner 1 and 2? Yeah, so I love the Raido games. Those are ones that I hold in a lot of high regard, but I'm very aware they are very flawed action RPGs. It's not a game, you can't just give someone Raido and then if they don't like it, be what do you mean you don't like this? It's really clunky. It's a great setting. It's a really good story, but its battle system definitely could use some tuning, but that's one that I could still go back to, and those are really, really great stories, and those are also super safe for their settings. But yeah, so not going back to Raido though. So Yakumo's whole thing is really interesting he's basically the yin to Nua's yang, and this is another one of they're definitely tied to a route for the alignment. I like the way their story is kind of told. The only thing that I kind of wish is a lot of Yakumo's story is through the world and talking. So like optional bits of dialogue, if you're looking around the city or if you're looking into different conversation trees that might be able to happen. Yakumo has an interesting story. It's just never told in a cinematic directly to your face, which again kind of goes back to that thing of that's a cool story. A lot of people are going to miss it. Like, so, like can't tell the amount of times I've been like, oh, did you hear about this specific member of his family? What happened to their fate? And they're like, no. Be like, well, where was it? Oh, you have to go to this one conversation during this mission, but not after this mission. So it's a lot of like stuff like that where you could miss it, but if you get it, it's a lot of nice extra world building. And next up, we've got our other very lovely yellow lady who Lady definitely Gaga. no one is simping on. You get Lady Gaga vibes from her?
Yes.
That's interesting. I don't
see how that looks.
I don't even know what I would go with her. That is tough. So yeah. So her.
I mean, when I see her, I think Zelanin from Strange Journey, and then when I think of Zelanin, I think of Lady Gaga.
That is a weird stretch. Also, it's like almost 11 o'clock at night. So please, somebody forgive me and tell me Yellow Mommy's name, because I'm somehow blanking only on hers. Abdiel. So Abdiel is another really interesting character. So she works with Bethel, and Bethel is just basically the group of angels who are all working. She works with Koshimizu, and you're working with them all in the beginning. Abdiel is a really interesting character in the sense of, like, they do a lot of good stuff with her, whereas, like, Koshimizu and Atsuda, it's not an even distribution of story. For whatever reason, whatever the writer of this game, they had a really good job balancing Ichiro and Abdiel's story. Like, it gives just both of them enough. Both of their, like, kind of where this is coming from, where everything else is coming from, in a way that I really, really, really liked. And next up, I'm basically just going to kind of talk about the story just in this general sense of, it was very interesting with the story in the sense that it has a very traditional flow for an open world game, which is kind of hard because, like, it's open world, but not Breath of the Wild open world. It's still very linear. I would say how some people instantly think of Final Fantasy XIII as bad linear design, I would say this is more like Final Fantasy VII Remake linear, where it's wide, but there's not really a lot after you've gone through the big areas. So stuff like that. And obviously, like, the areas in SMT5 are way bigger than anything you would see in 7, but it is, at the end of the day, if you're just going from point A to point B, there's not going to be a lot of you're not going to get lost in 5. There's not going to be that moment where you're like, I don't know what to do here.
There may be some times where you're, like, trying to find, like, an abscess or something, and you'll have trouble.
Oh, those are... So, yeah, this is one of the funny things that I'll come into with gameplay for sure. This game, I was surprised I didn't hear about it with reviews, but when more people have been playing about it, I still am constantly surprised how many people don't complain about the lack of puzzles, because this game does not have very many things in design of traditional dungeons or traditional puzzles. A lot of that comes from the platforming, the world building, and just like this game's story, I think, does such a good job, for at least like when I was playing it, it does a great job of dangling keys in front of you while still making it really, really satisfying in those little bits of, like I said, lore. There's no reason to not do every side quest. Every side quest will either make you more powerful or develop the story or give you a new Easter egg or something else to kind of go off. There's never, even the most fetch questy of fetch quests were something that I would get funny dialogue from. The writing at least made it worth it. It was never out of your way. The fast travel makes it really, really satisfying like that. And so, like, with the core story, I think another thing that was really nice about it is you're never always stuck in the desert, because these are sectioned off hub areas. You're still going back to Tokyo. You're still checking in with people, which is really nice. And I know people were worried at first that, okay, if we're going back to our school, if we're going back to Tokyo, I don't want this just to become Persona, which would have been really, really easy. Thankfully, they do a really good job of nuking the chance of this ever being Persona after the first major return to Tokyo. So what was nice about that, though, is one of the things that would have been really easy with this game is always sticking you in your Nahabino form. And the game, I think, does it just enough of separating you, as you see in the middle here of this slide, of there are moments where, hey, I'm in the real world. I don't need to be this proto-fiend. I can exist. We can talk. There are moments where Algami is without you, the protagonist, because you don't really need that. So those moments are really, really nice to kind of flesh out and develop. The game does also a really good job with the storytelling of explaining that this is something that has happened across almost 2 decades, but also leaving enough interesting breadcrumbs to really make you want to think, okay, how does this actually relate in terms of time? What's really going to be like happening in terms of the game plan? The only like little weird thing with me, and I've kind of brought this up before, is choice never matters in the game, which is really disappointing at the end of the day. There's literally, you can just get to the point in the game where you can do anything you want until select option A, B, or C, and that's your ending. There are benefits to playing neutral. There are benefits to playing law or chaos. You can get special skills. Nothing is tied to the story in that way. So outside of exclusive miracles, which are ways that you like level up, you're not going to be missing anything story-wise, which I know some people have taken as, oh, that sucks because this story doesn't really let me affect my choices. Whereas I think of it like this. This was me just having Atlas admit to me, hey, we're really bad at this, but hey, making a game with a lot of choices is really expensive, and we're not Obsidian. So like, when you make a game where your choices actually affect the story, that actually, if you want that choice to feel meaningful, that has to branch, that has to have a different effect, that has to now make a new storyline where, hey, what if this character's died? What if you decide to kill this character? And when you don't have those choices, I think sometimes it can feel like it's missing, but the problem with this is there's a lot of times where you, the character, will be asked, hey, do you want to walk home by yourself or do you want to hang out with us? Okay, I want to hang out with you. Obviously, you hang out with them, the story continues. I don't want to hang out with you. Oh, fuck your opinion. You're hanging out with us anyways. It doesn't matter. So it's just one of those things of like, I'm glad they limited those as much as possible, but then it just goes back to like, why are you giving us the illusion of choice if the outcome is the same every time? Where like, what's really, really funny is like, I don't know if anyone was anyone here like a big Mass Effect fan back in the day? Yeah. Like, do you remember how big of a fuss everyone in the Mass Effect community made at how shallow the endings for 3 were? Because no matter really what you did, it was red, yellow, green, or whatever the hell the color explosion differences was at the end. SMT's endings are literally that. Obviously, they're a lot more narratively deeper and they'll make you think a little bit more than like Mass Effect 3's ending. But at the end of the day, your choices did not matter through that entire playthrough until you chose what color ending do you want.
I kind of get the feeling they might have started developing the game with the intention of that, but then by the time they got to the end,
see, for me,
they were pressed for time.
No, see, I don't get like that this was rushed at all. I don't get this had to like get like, this doesn't give me Phantom Pain vibes. I'm not like, where's the ending? If anything, the ending of SMT5 leaves me wanting another game that like elaborates off of it, because the interesting thing with it is like, the only kind of like gimme I could give you is like, I think sectioning the game's story into 4 areas makes sense, but it's also one of those things of like, boy, I would have loved more. And we're going to get to this with like the next little section. There's a section where you're getting different representations of different demon branches across the globe, and that was like, awesome, let's go globe traveling. You're always in Tokyo. Everyone just comes to you. Which then, your first natural course of action would be like, that's cool, let's go to Greece. That's probably really expensive to think of a reason to go to Greece, having to design Greece, very different than a post-apocalyptic Tokyo, aspects like that. So I can see how you would be like, money would affect this, but also at the end of the day, Atlas has said a lot of various times of like, hey, a lot of what makes Shin Megami Tensei and even Persona is that these are Japanese tied like stories and stuff like that, which obviously like they've dipped their toes into with stuff like Strange Journey, but at the end of the day, like they have a very like heavy kind of focus with that. So it's one of those ones where it's like, if you don't like it, or if you like, if it's just like, I'm not a fan of it, I definitely get it, but it is one of those weird ones of like, at least for me, I never got the feeling like, yeah, the money ran out, because this game was in development for like over 5 years. And then
it was announced on the same time as the
Switch coming out. Yeah, it was at that big Switch reveal. So like, it's one of those things of like, I think if a story makes you wish there was more, that doesn't necessarily mean the story there was bad. If anything, like the fact that I want more of this world was kind of a testament to the story that I got. Like there are so many games of, like I said, going back to Nocturne. When Nocturne ended, every ending except True Demon ending, I'm like, fuck it, cool. That world sounds boring or is blown up. The only ending in Nocturne I would want to see what happens after is True Demon ending, which of course they would never make because that's just God of War 2, the demon game. It's just you fighting everybody in this big like angel versus demon war, and they're never going to make that game.
The True Demon ending, it was kind of like a bonus ending for the Maniacs version of Nocturne.
No, exactly. But like all the other ones are very ambiguous of like restart, put things back in time. Like I didn't care about those endings in a lot of senses that like made me want to be like, oh, this is interesting, or like, okay, this could be an interesting kind of thing for it. It was like, here's my homie, I sided with my homie, I'm gonna mess things up with this guy. So speaking of our branches and everything we have here, these are some of the Bethel leaders. Spoilers for the Indian representation. Shiva is in the game. I'm sorry, everybody. Shiva. So...
Oh, it's the guy from Apocalypse right there.
Exactly. So we have, representing the Greece branch, we've got Odin... sorry, not Odin. We have Zeus, who is definitely not Monokuma from Danganronpa. I'm actually, like... This is one of those funny ones of, like, ever since I saw this back in... Deep Strange Journey or Strange Journey Redux, I've always been a really big fan of this design. Just a kind of going back to my like dumb mythology like boner I have with everything, but also I'm always kind of turned off by the idea of Zeus is all good or Zeus is all horny having sex with everyone all the time. I like the nebulousness of like, even in the game, like the way that they use Zeus's character is really interesting. Of like, he is as much an antagonist in this as he is just a person existing in this world. Odin is someone I wish we got probably a little bit more screen time with, but at the same time, what a absolutely fucking sick design. I do find it weird that they don't limit it to Norse. He is all Northern Europe, which is a weird pull. Like specifically Odin is all Northern Europe, which like I don't know if that's just like because Vikings and Norse was really, really powerful, or maybe they just forgot other powerful gods. But I feel like if we can have one specifically for Greece in Greek mythology, how all Northern European and Anglo-Saxon just goes all to Odin for some reason. But at the same time, hey, our next one, we have the Egypt branch. This is a totally new original design by Doi for this one. So we have Khonsu. And Khonsu is one of my like favorite things for it. And then, hilariously enough, another one of those characters, unfortunately, if you don't seek out his character, you will see him in a really cool introductory cutscene, and he will vanish off of the face of the earth. But if you seek him out, has some very, very cool stuff for them. This one, I always forget his name. I know it's V. It's like Visaki or Vasuki or something. Voski. So Voski is not, thankfully, I shouldn't say thankfully, the Indian branch representative. What I think was interesting is he is basically a surrogate in place of the actual person being there. And what was so interesting is the way that they kind of use the Indian branch's leader not being there. I think was a really, really interesting choice of like the way all of the gods being there. Like they're not just like, oh, here are 4 bosses you have to fight. Yes, you can fight all of them the same way you can fight everybody. But I would say maybe Odin is probably the only one who just feels like a boss. Everyone else they feel has reason and is definitely kind of like voiced out for it in ways I would have liked. I don't know why Odin kind of got shafted, but I mean at least they gave him a really cool moveset and everything for it, so if that helps out a little bit. Next up we have gameplay, because we're 45 minutes into this slideshow, and I guess I should talk about gameplay at some point. So SMT5's gameplay is probably one of the most addictive RPG loops I've like ever played. So I have a very vast history of RPGs, and even in 2021 was no slouch for RPGs. Really, really fast, and the way that they like moved in the battles for it, because one of my biggest worries when the game moved to Unreal Engine 4 was, God, I am ready for really long, annoying load times. And if you've not played SMT5, I genuinely think it is probably the most, if not one of the most technically impressive Switch games. I know for sure it is the most technically impressive for me in terms of Unreal games. That's not saying a lot for Switch because the Switch can barely run Unreal Engine 4, but that's not Unreal Engine 4.
Oh,
also, Doom Eternal is running in potato mode. It runs, but that no one's like, bro, have you seen Doom Eternal? We go at Doom Eternal on Switch is like, that's great that it runs. That's like when I show someone Borderlands 2 on Vita. I'm not showing that to like impress them. They're like, yo, this is running? And I'm like, bro, let me show you the raid single frame count. So I played it in both. This is one of those funny things of I play my Switch. I'm pretty ambiguous in terms of how much I do for it. This is a testament to how good it is, especially as a game that has a very dynamic resolution. It like tops out at 720. It looks like if you only had a light, it's a really pretty game on the light. But the way that they use the anti-aliasing and the way that like they hide a lot of their what would be technical limitations. Once I played it on like my 70-inch OLED, I was like, oh, dude, I can't go back to my hand. Like it's like trying to watch Dunkirk on your phone. It's like, it's the same experience, but you're not really experiencing it. So, like, that kind of goes back to the testament of, like, how good it looked and everything for it, which, again, was funny because, like, it's dipping in frames. It's not a super steady, like, experience for that. But with the kind of game it is, it never affected the platforming for me, which I was really, really worried about that, especially with how big the world is and you're exploring. So that's a good one. The battles were always really fast. If you're kind of, like, looking for it, one of the things you'll almost never see in battle, you will never see all of the enemies you're fighting and all of your party, because that is too much for the Switch to run. So the game does a good job of like, oh, cool. So I will just always show the enemies and only show who's attacking, because you're never doing like tag team combos. So the game always does a good job of like showing when to hide things. And going back to the open world design, they will limit frames of animation. Like you guys in the back, if you were an SMT5, you would look like a 5 frame per second animation. Because who needs to look at something that far back in a giant open world you're running through all the time? So it does really, really smart tricks like that to kind of like trick you unless you're looking for it out there. Like everything in the world like looks good. And also it does the impossible, at least like for me, of like this game is constantly in the desert. The desert is a pretty boring visual place, especially post-apocalyptic anything. It's hard to not feel like, unless you're something like The Last of Us or doing post-apocalyptic, where it's like, I've seen this, I've done this a million times. And especially kind of going back to the Japan thing of I've definitely I've gotten a lot of, I'm sick of looking at Tokyo in RPGs. And it's nice that having like a semblance, like if you know these landmarks, there's interesting things in the world, but nothing about it feels like Japan. There are places, there's things that they reference in the world that are real locations that it's really, really cool, but it just feels like a very interesting designed kind of open world in the process.
You can run it at a 4K 60 and use it. That shit buttered.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Because of the way that the game was made, and this is so funny. So it was made in Unreal Engine 4. Knowing what I know about like Unreal 4 like dev kits, that PC version is just ready. Yeah, all it takes is just you bringing it over there. Like they didn't limit the frame rate. They didn't limit like the graphical stuff. So when this eventually comes to PC, which it's gonna come, I'm sorry, it'll be an Epic Game Store exclusive, but that's just how the world works. Once it's there, like it's gonna look great. And once it comes to other consoles, it's gonna look great for it. But the nice thing with it, it's not like one of those games of like. Thankfully, Nintendo hasn't had one of these in a while. We might probably get that with, like... Hopefully we don't get that with Arceus, but I bet we will for Pokemon this month. Of when you look at a really cool concept or just cool Switch game, and it's only on Switch, like, this is great. But, man, this runs like trash. Which, like, is just an experience that sucks. Like, you get that very few times with, like, Breath of the Wild, and that always felt like Nintendo pushing... like as hard as they could. Like, because when I'm playing Age of Calamity, I'm having a blast, but I'm not joking. That runs at like almost 10 frames a second sometimes, just because it's pushing a lot, but it's a Switch exclusive, so really what can you do?
Yeah, like I was playing with the Great Fairies in that game. It ran very slow when you play as them.
Shit is a PowerPoint.
Yeah, so kind of going back to a little bit of the other things. So we have Fusions and Miracles. This one I can kind of blow through. Fusions is very much kind of what you would come to expect. You're fusing your demons, stuff like that. I really liked the Demon Compendium for 5. They had a good amount of not only new but returning, and the designs that were altered I think was really, really interesting. The Miracle system is one that I think is going to make replaying it a lot more fun of how easy do you want to make the game for yourself. By collecting the Memon, which are like these collectibles around the world, there's 200 of them. Thank God it's not like the Korok seeds. It's actually fun to collect them. Oh, and the best part about them is kind of going back to the world in the storytelling. If you collect all of them, they all have unique dialogue. They all give you info about the world that's going to be like, hey, did you know this about blah, blah, blah? So, yeah.
Untitled Tensei's mascot, what's his name?
Jack Frost, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is Doi's redesign of Jack Frost for it. And so the interesting thing, though, about the Miracles is, especially like if you're playing, and this game can be definitely really, really challenging, it's nice to then kind of give yourself, okay, let's know what Miracles I want to focus on. But there's also that game of, it's not like you have a skill tree totally unlocked. The way you can unlock these Miracles to begin with is you have to have Glory, which has to be either earned or collected, or you have to also unlock the skill to be unlocked by fighting these basically mini boss like towers, like not like a Ubisoft tower, but it does do one of those things of like unlocking the map. So they basically copied Ubisoft with like just the bare minimum of it. And these little like mini boss towers are also kind of fun puzzles in terms of sometimes it's a harder boss, but then other times it'll be challenges that almost seem like impossible. Like I found one really late game that I was maybe level 69 or something like that. Thank you. And all of them were level 99 creatures. But what was funny is they were all the first 4 creatures you fight against. So it was a slime, a pixie, eggplant, penis monster, and onion face or something. And so
hard.
So that one was really, really fun of like, that should seem impossible, a bunch of level 99s, but you already know their weaknesses, you know what to do, and as long as you can use the press turn system correctly and not die or get like one-shotted or whatever, it was a fun challenge. Like it just felt like that whole battle for me was like playing Russian roulette of like, I shouldn't be able to do this, but it's really, really, really satisfying to do so.
I had to like adjust my party to beat that one.
That was one of those weird ones of like, thankfully you can always quit the abscess and come back with no penalty. The only problem with that was everyone I had in my party were like the only characters I had health and like no real way to get like MP back.
Yeah.
Can you pick what spells you get when you use or is it
Yes, it's thankfully not randoms. So it's interesting. And actually one of the best parts is the best part about this one is they have specifically, there's fusion for demons, but not only that is you can actually just do, I love having a party of just sexual body parts. I only want to have meme characters. I want all Mothman or I want all Jack Bros. But sometimes they have weaknesses that are going to fuck me over in a boss fight, or sometimes I need them to have moves that aren't going to just like be like a weak ice attack to everybody. So you can actually take, let's say I'm going to get Odin, and I'm going to take his electricity moves, and I'm going to put them on this character. You can get those powers, you can get those alignments, you can get those weaknesses and buffs and stuff and bring them to other characters and transfer basically their skills over to the same demon. So if you have if you're one of those people like me, I definitely get in this groove with a lot of like monster collecting RPGs. I like this character, but I have to say bye to it because you're upgrading the characters. You have to keep getting the new is the good stuff, or otherwise you're just going to die or run your head into the wall. So the game does a good job, again, kind of going back to the miracles of it's very flexible. It'll let you play the way you want to without feeling like you're kind of running into the wall.
Can you use like God and shit, like late game?
You can basically fuse, like everybody is playable with the exception of some weird ones. Not a spoiler to say you can't get Yakumo for some reason. Like, he's got model data there, but he just can't, like, there's just never a way to get him, which seems very, very odd. But yeah, for the most part, everybody you would think of is playable or summonable in some way, shape, or form. So, going back, though, so we have our reps. We kind of talked about these already before, and we're definitely running late on time. And since we're not really going spoilers, this will go into my point, though, of, like I said, you get to this point in the game, there's this half zoom in shot, and it goes, cool, what ending do you want? Just pick it. I don't care, bro. The only one they really lock behind it is an extended kind of a neutral take for an ending, but that...
I'm liking this game already.
So yes, if you want to be a big simp, you can always uphold God's order or anything else. We will not judge.
Man upstairs.
Kind of going back though into the other things though, there is an extended ending. I know there's the Japanese guide for it. I don't think we have an official name for it in English yet, but I'd be very interested because I am always kind of against when this is like, oh, it's the true ending. Like, this is the only one that actually matters because that's like the secret or harder to get ending. I don't really think that. It's definitely the one that like takes the most work to get and gets more context. But I always like to look at these endings as kind of like, hey, your chaos ending is just as valid as this like harder to get ending, just because they all kind of make you get to think differently. Here's a little quickie. Yeah, exactly. So here's the quickie for DLC. I'll give you all a really quick summary for it. In the middle, here is the Return of the True Demon. If you like Nocturne, please buy this. This is a really great DLC quest.
I'm getting that one.
It also the best part. This is the only one that is friendly to start your first playthrough with. There are placed out bosses. So if you've ever played Nocturne and like the fiends, they place the fiends throughout your entire playthrough, and it finds them at a normal pace. So you're fighting Matador at like around level 30. You're fighting like Lady Harlot at where you would think like maybe 60 or something like that. So the game does a good job of pacing those out, and the Demi-Fiend fight is very, very fun, and there's way more dialogue than you would ever think. Like, they put a lot of work into this $10 piece of DLC. Really quick, Mephisto, cool, interesting quest. Not awesome, but is a really cool demon to have. So if you like Mephisto or are a WandaVision fan, just get that, I guess.
If you're disappointed that he didn't show up in WandaVision.
Yeah, exactly. Cleopatra is based Cleopatra, so if you want to be horny on main, get Cleopatra's DLC. And Artemis, unfortunately, does not have her Persona 3 boobs design, but if you're a big Saint Seiya fan, you can enjoy that. And the one in the bottom right is the Let's Make the Game Really Easy for Myself. And there it is. Just don't use that. Or if you're like me and bought it for review purposes, just turn it off immediately because it floods the map. And yeah, that is pretty much it. I wanted to kind of open the floor, but I think we pretty much talked about it. Does anyone here have anything they want to say about SMT5 or any questions about it before we wrap this up?
Yeah, about when journalists were like complaining about the game, saying how they had to compare it to Persona 5.
Is everybody in the room aware of the IGN review for this game?
Yeah.
Well, if you hate that review, I highly recommend. The reviewer is actually a very, very nice person, and I'm not just saying that because they talked to me. The reviewer, Lynn, actually, I did an interview with them, kind of talking about the situation. At first, immediately after reviewing it, I talked to them kind of about the situation, where they were in the headspace of it, because this was that person's first time reviewing an SMT game. They'd pretty much, I think, started with 5 and then played a little bit of 4 and then went to this for it. And yeah, if you have complaints, it's almost a 2-hour-long conversation. It's a really good kind of deep dive into not only what went into their head making the review, but also the reception, learning from it. It's not like they were like, this is the way, everyone's complaining.
I saw a video about how that review is like showing a decline in gaming journalism and stuff.
So yeah, hilariously, yeah, I'm featured in that video for no reason at all. The funny thing about that is, it's really easy just to be like comparing X to Y shows that you're a bad reviewer or blah blah blah. Like, there's a reason for it, but it is also one of those things of like, there's no such thing as like a good review. You can enjoy some ways of some reviews for it, and obviously, exactly. And it's also one of those things of like, I've also written a bunch of like reviews. I'm sure so many of my reviews I've ever done are terrible. I'm never going to go back and listen to my Devil Survivor 2 review, even if you paid me. So it's like one of those things of like, sometimes we can like do a good job at our job and maybe like, hey, I could have done that review better. Or because this is another one of those things of, this is a long game. Even for me, like, I got this game almost like 3 weeks before release. I didn't get my review done until like a week after it was out for everybody. So it was one of those things of like, sometimes you got to rush. And like for something like an IGN, even where this wasn't like a high priority review, it's one of those things of like, we don't know like the mental kind of headspace of like, what went into that person, like where was that person at mentally going into that review, not only from an informative state, but even just like as a writer. So that's why I wanted to make that podcast. And if you seriously either love or hate that review, It's like one of my favorite conversations I had last year. Also, hilariously enough, because more people have actually sided with that review after beating the game. So if you would like, I also did a spoiler cast with my friend Mac and the reviewer from IGN Lynn. It's like a big old spoiler cast of us just talking about the game after you beat it. God knows it's not going anywhere.
Like, I mean, the review didn't bother me as much. I think the only review that bothered me from IGN was their No More Heroes 3 review.
Not their God Hand review.
Oh, well, I haven't really played God Hand yet.
So everybody,
So I did buy it for my PS3.
thank you for letting me spoil you with this very fun picture, but I couldn't resist not doing this for the ending. Thank you all for coming to the panel at now 11 o'clock at night. And thank you to my wonderful tech assistant in the back, who I don't know their name, for helping me set this up. I appreciate the help, everybody coming. I love that we started with I think 3 people here being bribed, so that was really nice.
I feel like I learned a lot. I don't know much about SMT. I want to get into it.
Yeah, at the very least, I hope that this postmortem would at least kind of be like, hey, even coming on from this, I can't say enough nice things about this. Obviously, it shouldn't be a surprise. This was my RPG of the year last year.
The SMT community, I looked you up. After you talk about that, I guess it's been a big part about the community.
I have been. Oh yeah, here I go. As this says, yes. If you did not hate listening to the sound of my voice, I do this on a weekly basis because that's what all niche video games need. So yeah, I do a weekly video game podcast all about SMT, Persona, and Atlas called Shin Megami Tensei Network. This is actually the 10th anniversary of doing that, so I'm sorry I've not quit after this many years. New episodes on Tuesday. It's everywhere you can find it. Do the YouTube, scan the code if you want to find me on Twitter. There's a Discord, there's a Facebook group. I'm sure there's an OnlyFans somewhere that somebody made. You can find us anywhere for all that fun stuff. So thank you guys for coming, and enjoy the rest of your convention.